Hi, I'm Spat from Spat Cave Studios, and this is Cosplay 101, how to make a monster spat. That's right, a spat. A spat is a baby oyster. It's also a small fight, also the past tense of spit. It's also something you wear on your shoes. So what we have here are an example of some spats that I've made over the years. They're basically creature feet that fit over an existing shoe. So you can walk around at a convention or at a Halloween parade outside without going barefoot underneath. You can actually build this onto a shoe. You can build it onto an existing shoe. You can also go and buy what I like, these little windsurf booties underneath, because it's something light, it's small, it's comfortable. They're like 10 bucks on Amazon. And you can walk around all day wearing these, showing off your really creepy monster feet. You could also even sculpt these as, you know, mechanical robot feet or in any other weird way. I decided today we're going to show you an example of making a zombie foot. So this way, if you're walking around as a zombie, you can have one foot with a shoe on and one with off, or do both feet as zombies. I don't care. We're going to show you a simple, easy way to make this. This is a great little weekend project, not super expensive, lots of easy stuff to work with. I'm going to show you that right now. First, we're going to start off with the actual casting that you're going to sculpt on. Obviously, it needs to be foot-shaped. You could just take one of your shoes and fill it with paper towels and use this as the base for sculpting. I like to have something that's a little bit bigger, a little bit more foot-shaped, which is this. You could go the complicated and expensive route, get some alginate or silicone, make an actual mold of your foot, and then fill it up with plaster or resin and make a hard copy and use that to sculpt on, which would be perfectly fine. It's a little bit more expensive, a little bit more time-consuming, and you'd end up with a perfect representation of your foot to sculpt on. But since these are going inside of a shoe, we're not actually sculpting appliances that are going to have to match a foot perfectly. These are perfectly fine, and these are super simple. Anyone who's ever had to do a body form for sewing or decided to make weird things will know that this is easily constructed using plastic wrap and duct tape. Those are your two pieces. That's all you really need. The key, wrap your foot in plastic wrap. Please wash your feet before you do this, especially if somebody else is doing this to you. You don't want to hand them over your nasty feet and have to wrap it. It gets pretty gross. You can do this with any body part. You could do your whole body in plastic wrap. I don't recommend doing it by yourself. I don't recommend wrapping your head in plastic wrap and then just thinking you're going to be okay. You will probably die. Have somebody else do it. Have somebody you trust do it, because there are some unsavory people in the world. So wrap your foot carefully, wrap it up. Go a little higher than you think you're going to need. I always like to try and have a little excess at the top, just in case I don't know how high up I'm going to sculpt that day. When it comes to actually wrapping the duct tape around on top, don't put the duct tape down and pull it around, because now you're making it super tight. The key is to stretch out the duct tape and then let it go around. This way it's not going to compress in the skin, make it really tight and snug and uncomfortable. You'll end up with a piece that's going to be much smaller than your actual foot. Not that it's going to make too much of a difference, but it just might. So try and be careful. You don't want to cut off circulation. You don't want to have your arm or leg in that mold with no blood going to your toes for a long period of time. Don't run with scissors. I'm going to do the disclaimers as we go for the safety instead of doing one big safety thing. Don't run with scissors. Don't poke yourself in the eye like I almost just did. If you have those EMT safety scissors that are flat on the bottom, those work great as well. So you can slide it against your skin and remove it. Be careful. Go slow, a little bit at a time. Inch your way out. Remove this. Have somebody that you trust do it. Once you have your form, tape it back closed, seal it up, and now it's time to stuff it. What do you stuff it with? Paper towels are fine, newspapers are fine. I have tons of scrap foam left in my shop, so that's what I generally stuff these things with. It's easy, it's light, you can pull it back out, not a problem. You could always fill it up with plaster, you could fill it with expanding foam. These are materials we could use in a future lesson. It's not really that necessary. It's not something you're going to be using for long periods of time. It's not something that you can't just make again for, you know, $1.80 or whatever it costs to make that one. Once you have your sculpting form ready, it's now time to sculpt. First thing we're going to do is put it inside the shoe. You want it in the shoe. You don't want to sculpt directly on the form. Don't worry about ruining the shoe. We're going to wrap the shoe also in plastic wrap just to make sure the clay doesn't stick to it, to keep it all nice and clean. All right, now that your sculpting form is ready, it's time to actually sculpt. What do you need to sculpt? We're going to need clay. Now, there's two types of clay, generally, oil-based and water-based clay. Oil-based clay is great for small things that need a lot of detail. If you want something big, creature pieces, hands, feet, arms, heads, I like to use water-based clay or WED clay, which is what I have here. Water-based clays are softer, they're much easier to handle, they're, moist and fun and big, and you can do big shapes with them really, really easily. Much more easily than you can with oil-based clay. Dip your hands in water while you're working with it, and that'll moisten it back up. If you're going to leave your clay overnight, you want to come back and finish sculpting in the morning, don't just leave it out. Water-based clays will dry, it'll start to crack, and you'll ruin everything that you've done before. The way to do it is to not spray the clay directly with water, but to instead spray paper towels with water, wrap the paper towels around the sculpture, and then seal it all up in a plastic bag. The next thing you're going to need, obviously, sculpting tools. Anywhere from $10 to $30 of sculpting tools. You could even just use a popsicle stick, just get an ice cream. Sponges, also fantastic for smoothing them out, for getting your textures in. Dip this in water, and you can use it to smooth out the clay beautifully. Great, great stuff. How do you sculpt? We go over this probably in every video. Sculpting is an art form. It's not easy. It's not something that everyone can do as well as everyone else. It's something that you definitely need to practice with. It's something that you're going to want to sit down and play with. Clay is reusable, especially if you're using the WED clay. So don't worry if you screw up. If you make a mistake, you can always just redo it. Sculpt it out. I did this thing in, I don't even know, 20 minutes, a half an hour. It is not my best sculpture ever. It is barely recognizable as a foot, but it came out pretty well. It came out good enough that I can splatter some blood on it, wear it with a costume and walk around, and people will get that it is my zombified foot walking around. Remember that these shoes, these spats, are going to be seen from 3 to 4 feet away. Minimum. That's you looking down at it is going to be 3 to 4 feet away. They're not going to get down on the ground and put their head right next to it and examine it from every possible angle. Some people may. Those are weird people. We try and avoid them. I made sure that there was one toe missing, another thing over here, and I gave the Achilles tendon a big tear out. Just make sure you don't, while digging out the clay, you don't hit the actual duct tape underneath or the shoe, because you want it to be on the clay level. Now comes molding. Molding is making a mold of the piece, and what we're going to use is plaster. I like plaster of Paris. You're going to hear me say this a lot in these videos. Plaster of Paris is cheap, 25 bucks for this 20-pound bag at Home Depot, or 15 bucks, whatever it is. You can get smaller boxes of it at an art supply store, but you're paying a lot more for a lot less. You can also use Hydrocal, which is better for smaller molds, not quite this one, or up to UltraCal 30, which is a great plaster that's going to survive forever, and you're going to make multiple molds. Plaster of Paris is going to be fine for you. It's a simple, quick plaster, dries fast, it's lightweight. It's not going to hold up to a lot of abuse, so don't drop it. But then again, what plaster will survive a drop? You're going to get a lot of use out of a 20-pound bag of plaster. You're going to get a lot of use out of it. The other thing you're going to need, mixing cups, mixing bowls, water, and of course, chip brushes. Chip brushes are gold. Buy these by the case if this is something you're going to want to do. Put some water in a bowl, sprinkle in your plaster, make little islands with it. Try and get the water to absorb the plaster. That's kind of the idea of the mixing. So you're going to sprinkle it on top, make little islands as they start to settle and the water is absorbing the plaster. That's when you're going to want to start giving a little mix. You want it not quite mud, but definitely thicker than water. You don't want it to be like a tapioca pudding consistency. That's a little too much. You won't get a lot of detail. Get it so it's a little runny, but not quite super runny. It's something you're going to have to feel with your hands and get the idea of, and then brush it into the mold carefully. Try not to damage any of the details on your clay. But remember that the brush marks, even, if you do press a little too hard while you're brushing, the brush marks are just going to look like little skin textures on the piece. It's not really going to be a deal breaker. After a couple of hours of letting the plaster cool, go back and check it and see how it feels. If you can feel it still giving off heat, then it's still curing. When it stops and it cools down, then it's okay. You can let it sit for a little bit longer, and then it's time to open it. If you open it too soon, the heat of the plaster has now warmed up the clay, making it a goopy soup almost inside that's going to make it a nightmare to remove. Let it cool a little bit longer than you might think you need to, just in case, because once you flip over the mold and start peeling out the clay, you're going to realize you don't want that clay hot. You want the clay nice and cool, room temperature, if not colder, and you can start peeling out the clay in big chunks. As you can see from the video, sometimes it comes out really well, sometimes you've got to dig with your little tools, get a stick in there. Try not to use metal. Metal tools will damage the plaster mold you just made. Wood tools are great. They generally won't unless you really poke at them. So, once you have your mold open and the clay is all cleared out, it's now time to cast.